Welcome back to Sit With Me. Today we get to sit with Liliana and hear her story with immigration and DACA. We got to sit with Bernie a couple weeks ago and hear about his experience with DACA. And so Lili will just add more insight to what DACA is, but also has her own story. Something I really think is important to remember is that everyone has their own individual story and we can't project that onto other people. So Bernie has his story and Lili has her story, and the people in your communities that are immigrants or have DACA status, they have a different story, and so what Lili and Bernie experience will be different than what other people experience, and so hopefully their stories can give you ways in which to be curious about those around you. So anyway, without further ado, I'd love to hop into Lili's story and let you hear about her experiences.
Well, first of all, DACA, D-A-C-A, stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And I actually wouldn't blame anyone for not knowing, because I had that status for a few years and had no idea what it meant.
Really?
Yes. But basically what it stands for, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So it's an immigration status that certain people qualify for if they came to the U.S. as children before 2007.
Okay.
And this was a program created by President Obama, which is a little controversial, I'll tell you why later.
Okay.
But he created the program through executive action. And there are a few requirements. So you need to have entered the US by a certain day in 2007, be a minor, so under the age of 18 when you entered,
okay,
and a few other requirements. And so basically it allows people that were brought to the US as children to obtain a temporary status in the US. So
okay,
with that, there's no pathway to citizenship, which means that we will never become citizens in this country on our own.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find other avenues to accomplish that. But we do get a work permit that is renewable every 2 years,
okay,
and protection from deportation. And every 2 years when we renew, they run a background check on us. We pay close to $600
just for that background check and
to renew. So basically to have our work permit extended for 2 more years. So
it's so short.
yeah, so basically we're living in this limbo state. Every 2 years they kind of check in on us and say, are you sure you're not a criminal yet?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
What have you been doing the last 2 years?
Yes. So yeah, it's the simplest way to put it is it's a limbo status.
Okay.
And the hard thing about DACA is that some of us were a few months old when we came, 1, 2 years old. I came when I was 2 years old.
Wow.
And so for a lot of us, this is the only country we've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
Yet for most of us, there's no way for us to obtain like a permanent status in this country,
Yeah.
which is really weird and really difficult because we can't leave the country. If we leave the country, then we're basically abandoning our DACA status, and we can't re-enter the country.
So no DACA recipient has left the country. They cannot leave unless maybe for medical. Can they leave for like medical reasons or?
Yeah, there is
death.
There's a permit called advanced parole that DACA recipients can apply for under certain circumstances, and it needs to be reviewed by immigration, and they need to decide, that you're allowed to go, and it's a couple $100 there too.
Wow.
And it's just a one-time trip, so you can't regularly leave.
You have to reapply for something else for another.
Yes.
Another situation.
Yes.
Presented itself. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And even if you leave with that travel permit, it still doesn't guarantee that they'll let you back in. It's
really?
not 100% certain. No. A lot of people do it and a lot of people have success, but some people also don't. So for a lot of people, they don't even consider it just because it feels so risky.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So have you left the country?
So I actually got my green card earlier this year.
Oh my!
Because I married a US citizen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that.
Yes.
Okay.
So I did then, but when I had DACA status, no, I never left the country.
Okay.
Didn't even want to risk it.
Yeah. I don't think I would, but I'm sure there's situations where you're torn.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Let's hear your story.
I came to the US when I was 2 years old. My family and I are from a part of Mexico called Michoacan, and it is beautiful. My parents came because Michoacan is infamous for being a state that 2 very large cartels are fighting over. And so they're constantly at war with each other, and the residents get caught in the crossfire of it and get hurt, right? And so it was just not a safe place to be in. So when my parents had me, I was 2 years old and I was their first child. They realized that it was not a place that they wanted to raise me in, and they couldn't get a visa, and even though they tried. And so eventually they decided that they had to cross over somehow to get here and to find safety. And they came with every intention to do it legally, but it wasn't possible for them. So they said, let's just get over there. And once we're there, we'll apply for a legal status. So they get here and they find out that there is no way for them to apply legally, and that the US's immigration system had not been updated in a really long time.
So what year is this?
This was 2000.
2000.
Yeah. And so my parents were like, okay, well, we're here. Let's stick around and speak to immigration attorneys and figure out, when there is a line to get into. And I put air quotation marks because people always use the word, well, why don't they just get in line?
Yeah, I've heard it.
And it boils my blood because, newsflash, there is no line for many people. And I wish it was that simple. In fact, I believe that people don't understand that no immigrant comes to this country wanting to be here illegally. In fact, it's a situation that they stumble into a lot of times. And so, unfortunately, going back to my story, there was no line for my parents to get into. So they had to wait until that line appeared one day. Yeah. And they were more than willing to spend the money that they needed to get in that line and not get in trouble with law enforcement or anything, so that they
I'm sure they were just scared.
Exactly. Because they wanted to have everything in line, so if one day that line appeared, they would be ready and they would qualify. And that's the story of a lot of immigrants in our country. And so I grew up in Orem, Utah. My parents came to Utah because I had an aunt here, and she said, there's some people here that they're called Mormons, and they're just so nice, and they're family people, and you should come here. It's the opposite of Michoacan, just safe and calm and a great place to raise a family. And so my parents were like, say less.
Yeah, we're there.
And they came over, and yeah, that's how we ended up.
Was it a scary journey for them to get here?
Yes.
I know you probably don't remember it, but
no,
from their stories.
Yes. Based on their stories, yes, it was very hard, and it was very traumatizing for my mom, especially because she was young as well. She had me when she was 16, I believe.
Oh my goodness.
So she was like 18 years old with a baby. And think about being with a young child on an airplane for a long time. Imagine that, except you don't have the comfort of an airplane. You're walking in the desert in the middle of the night.
Oh my goodness.
So, it was so scary, but they really felt like it's what they needed to do to give me a better future. And so we came to Utah. We were Catholic and grew up in Utah. I guess at a young age, my parents taught me to take advantage of the opportunities that I had in the United States, because they were opportunities that they didn't have in Mexico. And so ever since I was a little girl, I was very focused in school. I really liked school. I had good grades. And in my mind, as an innocent, naive child, I was like, we are all equal. We are all the same. Me and all my classmates. We all have the same potential, and we can all achieve the same things in this country. And then fast forward to high school, when I started applying to schools, I found out that I was undocumented. And it was something that I didn't really understand. I didn't understand why it limited me so much. So little by little, I started learning what that meant. We learned about DACA. I applied, I got DACA status. And
oh, so you hadn't even applied for it. So like, what did that look like? You went to apply for school, and when were you like, oh, I can't, like, did your parents tell you? Did the school counselor talk to you about it, or what was?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Have you heard of Latinos in Action? So I was in the Latinos in Action at my school, and the Latinos in Action teacher was helping me fill out my application. And I think I was just a sophomore in high school. We were just preparing to fill out college applications. And I had asked her what a social security number was, and she tried to explain it to me, and I was like, I don't think I have one of those. And she was like, let me talk to your parents. And then my parents ended up telling her, and she ended up telling me.
Okay.
And so that's kind of when I found out. And then we learned about DACA. It was a few years old at that point. But something that a lot of people don't understand about DACA is that they picture it being Obama announces a program and everyone just runs and applies for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of mistrust between the immigrant community and the government, where some people were like, is this a trap?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it took a lot of time for people to kind of warm up to the idea of actually applying,
Mm-hmm.
because it felt a little bit like a trap. And so we didn't know a ton of people that had it. A lot of people did at that point. We just personally didn't know them. And I ended up applying and qualifying for it. And we were like, okay, everything seems to be okay. And it opened the doors for me to qualify for certain scholarships. It didn't disqualify me from attending college being undocumented before I got DACA, but it was gonna limit the amount of scholarships I could receive. And basically, the way it was explained to me was that I would go to college, and once I graduated, got my diploma, I wouldn't be able to work in that field anyways, because I don't have a work permit.
Yeah.
So I'd basically be doing all that work just to never actually work in that field.
Yeah.
And at that point in my life, I wanted to be a gynecologist.
Oh, wow.
And so, it was a rude awakening for me, for sure.
Yeah, what did you feel like? Because you didn't hear it from your parents.
Yeah.
You heard it from accounts. It sounds like probably someone you trusted, though.
Yeah. At first I was a little bit upset with my parents. I was just like, why would you hide this from me?
Yeah.
And talking to them, they told me that they didn't want to put these limitations in my head too early on in my life. They had hope that things could change and that we could become legal before the time that I was applying to colleges. And unfortunately, our government has failed time and time again to pass any sort of immigration reform, right? And so it keeps people stuck here that want to be legal and they just can't.
Yeah.
And my parents had that hope. And so they were just kind of holding out. And once the time came, they realized that we were running out of time, unfortunately.
So you said that you had felt like you had this false assumption that you were all equals in elementary school. Is this in high school when you were like, oh, that's not the case, or does that happen later?
Yes, I would say this was definitely when I kind of woke up and was like, oh, the government has decided that I'm not equal to you because I didn't enter with a piece of paper, or because I wasn't born here. And it just felt like all these imaginary things,
Yeah, 17, 18, or 16 maybe even. That's like a lot to process.
Yeah, and
makes you grow up, probably.
Yes, and I was always an overachiever, and so it just kind of made me feel like, what have I not done to prove myself?
Yeah.
I was never really rebellious at any point in my life either. In fact, when I was 14, I was an altar girl at my local Catholic church in Orem, Utah. And as part of that, we would have Bible study with the priest. And I started having a lot of questions about things that he was teaching us. And when I would ask him, he was like an older guy. I don't want to make it sound like every Catholic priest is like this, but he was like this older guy, and he would get so annoyed with me when I asked questions. And so he'd just be like, it's not important.
Oh, really?
And I'd have questions about like, well, why are there so many churches? How did this one start? How do we know this is the true one? Because I have this idea that some are probably false and some probably have truth. And he couldn't answer my questions, so I went to my best friend, who was also 14. Her and I were having a sleepover, and I asked her all these questions, and she was like, I don't have the answers to any of those questions, but I go to this church, and I feel like I belong there, and like God is there. Maybe you can come with me, and maybe you can find your answers there. And that was a Sunday that I went to the Latter-day Saint Church for the first time.
Wow.
And in sacrament meeting, they talked about Joseph Smith and his first vision and the questions and doubts he had, and I was like,
That's me.
Yeah, I was like, is someone here stalking me? And I really resonated with his story, and I just thought it was beautiful, and I felt the same way my friend did. And so I ended up joining the LDS church. No one else in my family did, and to this day, in my immediate family at least, no one has joined the LDS church, but extended family members have. And that's
when you were 14? You joined when you were 14?
I was 14.
And your parents were okay with it?
No.
Okay.
It took a lot of convincing, but up until that point in my life, my mom called that my rebellious phase, which was breaking away from the faith that my family had participated in for generations and generations, and saying, I'm going to do my own thing now.
Wow.
So just, I guess, to kind of really explain what I was like as a teenager. I was just very, very well behaved.
That was your rebellion.
Yes, that was my rebellion, joining an LDS church. And so I guess it was hard for me to be like, what more can I do to prove myself? And why can I not access this thing that I want and that my family wants? That felt very frustrating and limiting. So I get DACA, and then I apply to colleges and everything. I end up serving an LDS mission as well, which was amazing. I served in the Washington, D.C. South Mission. And up until that point in my life, I didn't really talk about my immigration status a ton. I mean, I would tell people like, oh, I have DACA, or no, I'm not a citizen. And then on my mission, my DACA status was expiring. And so I had to renew it. Oh, you know what? Back up. My first day out in the mission field, we go into the very first home. And we're sitting with a family, and they're just getting to know me because I'm the new sister missionary, and it's so exciting. And the topic comes up about me having DACA. And they say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear about the news today. And I was like, what? Because for those that don't know, missionaries don't have access to like internet or social media, things like that. Well, now they do, but back then they did not. And during this time, 2017, President Donald Trump was in office. And this was the day that statement came out that they were going to stop all initial DACA applications, and that they were going to stop the trips that allow us to go outside of the country. And basically they were just like really going to restrict the program. And during this time when Trump was running, he spoke very poorly about DACA recipients. In fact, he called us criminals in one of his tweets, which is kind of funny because they do background checks on us every 2 years. And even something as minor as like a speeding ticket could jeopardize us renewing our status.
Wow.
And so not only was that hurtful, it was false. In fact, there's no way a DACA recipient can be a criminal because of that, because they check up on us every 2 years. So he had said horrible things about us in our program, and he had vowed to end it. And so it was something that I felt like I could just finally put on pause and just focus on my mission, focus on the Lord. And then all of a sudden I was just slapped in the face.
First day out.
Yes, first day, first home, first family I spoke to. And they told me the news, and I don't know what my face looked like, but they got really worried and were just like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you didn't know this already. And I couldn't focus, and obviously my companion could tell that I was really startled too. So she kind of wrapped it up, and we got to the car, and I just started crying, and I called the mission president, and we had to figure it out from there. But we started having backup plans. He basically said that if my status was taken away, I would have to go back home and things like that. We kind of started doing some contingency planning, and that was really, really hard. And I remember my mission companion started asking me about my status, and it was the first time someone was genuinely interested in realizing what a burden it was on my life. And as she started asking me questions, I started realizing how much I just didn't know, because it was an area of my life that I was scared to open up about. It was something in my life. I just felt like if more people knew about my immigration status, they would see me as less than, or like I wasn't doing enough, or like I wasn't worth, having that status. And so seeing my companion just be genuinely concerned and asking out of curiosity and love, it was something new to me, and it was really powerful. And it kind of forced me to be like, okay, I need to learn more about this and what this is, because obviously people share my frustration about it. Maybe if more people knew, it could actually lead to change. So that was a point in my life where I started to kind of lean into that a little bit more. And so now, fast forward to this point in my life, I have over 4 years of experience in the immigration law field. I was an immigration paralegal. And then now I'm an Immigrant Family Policy Analyst at Voices for Utah Children. So I did kind of like the legal, paralegal work, and then now I'm more in like the policy advocacy space.
Okay, I want to talk about that, but I'm held up on your kind of this moment on your mission when you realized this sister, like your companion, cared about you and saw you. And the reason though that you hadn't opened up about it was because you felt like your worth was somehow tied to this legal status.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to talk about, like, why is there, like, where does this rhetoric come from that there are good immigrants and there are bad immigrants?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that's kind of what fueled that mindset for you a little bit. So I'd love it if you touched on that.
Yes, thanks for asking that question. I feel like it's so important, especially right now, especially after the election that we've just had. I think the main issue has always been that people oversimplify immigration and immigration statuses, right? It's very black and white, where if you're here legally, you're good. If you're here illegally, you're bad, right? Just a lot of oversimplification of immigration statuses and intentions, you know, almost saying if you're here legally, well, you didn't even try. And you must be a criminal, because if you weren't a criminal, then you could obviously just get in line and do the process. Which again, the people that say just get in line usually know nothing about the process. But yeah, even growing up and having DACA status, once I started advocating, I would go and meet with politicians and they would say, you know what, you DACA recipients, I really pity you, because you're the good ones. You're the ones who were brought here by your parents at a young age. You had no idea what was going on. You didn't willingly break the law. Your parents forced you to break the law. So it's their fault, not yours. So you deserve citizenship because you didn't break the law. Your parents did. And that really bothered me, because my parents are not the villains of my story. They're the heroes of my story. You know, they removed me from a dangerous place where I would not be able to thrive and live up to my potential, and they brought me to a safer place. And even though they couldn't do it legally initially, they had every intention to come here and do it legally. It just didn't work out that way for them because of how our government works. And so I really think that's tied into the way I viewed myself, and I worried that a lot of other people would share that perspective, because it was something that was said to me so often that it did kind of, you know, make me think about how much my worth really was tied to my immigration status. And at that point in my life, I honestly also thought that my achievements determined my worth, especially growing up as the oldest daughter, first person in my family to learn English, first person in my family to graduate from high school, to go to college. You know, my parents always looked to me and would say, you know, because of you accomplishing this, we know that our sacrifices were worth it. And that's a very loving thing to say, but at a young age, I interpreted that as,
it's my value.
It's my value, exactly. And so,
if I hadn't done that, their sacrifices wouldn't have been worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's heavy to carry.
Yeah. And so, it was something I couldn't really dive into. I'd never gone to therapy to really process it. And so, it was something that kind of haunted me throughout my life and made me scared to open up about that with a lot of people.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's a deep piece of you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're kind of talking to an audience that is in Utah, and there's some unique things about Utah.
Yes.
One, you've joined the church. It's a pretty homogenous community. So I would love to know what your experiences have been specifically tied to Utah.
Oh, that's such a good question. Very early on, when I was investigating the church, which is Utah terminology, but basically just means, you know, when I was learning about the church, meeting with the missionaries, and they were teaching me about the beliefs, it was extremely welcoming. And it was a community that accepted me, and I went to a congregation within the LDS church that was Spanish speaking. So I was just surrounded by Latinos, and it just felt like I think it was the first time in Utah that, well, other than my Catholic church, it was the first time in Utah that I felt like I found a community that was like me, that looked like me, that you know, spoke the language my parents and I spoke at home. I just felt like I didn't have to try as hard, and like we just kind of understood each other a little bit more. So it definitely gave me that sense of community, which I really needed at that point in my time. I mean, at that point in my life, because growing up in a predominantly white area, I learned very early on that I did not fit the beauty standards.
Interesting.
And yes, I was not tall. I was not blonde. I did not have blue eyes. And I just didn't think I was very pretty. And I didn't feel very good about myself. And it was really, really hard for me. And so when I joined this congregation, I just kind of felt like I belonged a little bit more, and like there were other girls there that I thought were beautiful that looked like me, and we would all compliment each other, and they kind of wore clothes that fit my body type a little bit better. Not the super long dresses that would like go past my feet that all the tall girls would wear. And so yeah, it was very healing for me to be in that space. I do remember learning about the pioneers, and we would just talk about their stories and the trek to come to Utah, which at the time was actually Mexico. A lot of people don't know that, but when the pioneers arrived to Utah, the land was Mexico at the time, and it was inhabited by other people. And we would just talk about the trek and everything they went through. I mean, we would even reenact their treks and just talk about it with so much honor. We would cry talking about it. And I just remember thinking, yeah, this is so powerful. It reminds me of my parents' trek to the United States.
And your trek.
Yes, and my trek that I don't remember, but my parents told me about. And people would just be like, whoa, no, like, not that. We're talking about their story. Like, they came here for religious freedom. That's different. And I was like, people come here to seeking religious freedom today still. And it almost, like, I could tell that me making that connection made a lot of people uncomfortable, which I thought was really interesting, where they were just like, no, it's not the same, it's different because God inspired them to migrate. And it was like, oh, so you don't think God can inspire his children to migrate today? And I could tell that this concept really started challenging certain people within the church, but it was mainly people that had been here for many generations. In fact, maybe even had pioneer ancestors themselves.
Yeah.
And so I almost started feeling like, well, maybe they're so far removed from it that it's hard for them to really lean into that empathy, But I just thought it was really interesting that they almost felt like threatened by it. We're like, no, don't you dare compare us to illegal immigration today.
Yes.
And now that I know a lot more about my immigration status and immigration in general, and I'm involved in advocacy, I bring it up now sometimes. And I get the same reaction.
Really?
And now, yes, obviously not from everyone, but especially this year with immigration being such a hot topic in the elections. And I was telling my husband the other day, I said, I miss the days when people just said, oh, immigration, I don't know about that topic, so I just can't speak on it. Because now everyone is so empowered to talk about it, and they have like zero experiences with it. They can't list maybe even more than 2 or 3 immigration statuses. They don't know any of the forms. They can't even like tell you half of the process to get citizenship or even residency, which some people don't even know what permanent residency is. But they feel so empowered to talk about immigration and what the solution is and what we have to do at the border. And it's like, no, there's a lot more nuance to it.
Yeah, and you're in the trenches, so tell us about what the work that you're doing right now. Tell us about the system.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say the system is extremely confusing and unfair and outdated. In fact, we haven't updated our immigration system. When people talk about passing immigration reform, that simply means we haven't updated our immigration laws, right? So when we say we need to pass immigration reform, it means we need to update our immigration laws to reflect the needs of our country today, which could be our humanitarian needs, which could be our workforce needs, right? Okay, where do we need to allocate more visas in industries that are struggling, right? For example, like the farm workers and things like that, teachers, nurses. And so our immigration system just hasn't been updated since the 80s. Yeah. And so, well, not significantly updated to the point where like it's improved because of the changes that we've made. And the way that needs to happen is obviously, we have a system in place to pass legislation, right? Federal or local. And so what it looks like is Congress and the Senate, federal, right, have to pass a bill that says, okay, this is how we're going to change the immigration system. But they can't do that because they're so divided. The Democrats will say, here's our bill, and it's perfect, and they haven't even spoken to a Republican to say, hey, what's your perspective? Let's make sure both sides of the aisle agree on this so that we can vote on it and actually get it to pass. Instead, what they've done throughout all the years is the Republicans have gotten together and said, okay, here's the perfect immigration bill, and it's super conservative. Does not even allocate visas to the fields that need it most in our field, right? And doesn't even touch on the humanitarian needs. And so again, even though I personally believe immigration should be about humanitarian efforts and about being Christ-like in all that we do, it can't just be about that, because at the end of the day, politicians are also responsible for things like the economy, right? But even the Republican bills didn't even address the economy in a lot of cases. They just wanted to create the most conservative immigration bill to just kind of stick it to the Democrats.
Yeah, which is the why.
I know, and then the Democrats would do the same, and they'd propose an immigration bill that was like super left, and it didn't even address like border security or the economy either. And so, yes.
Or my bias in that?
No, it is very clear.
Okay.
And so it's just kind of this back and forth game, and it's so funny because at this point in my career, I've gone to DC a few times to speak to politicians outside of Utah. And every single time I walk into an office to meet with a Democrat, and they'll say, oh, you DACA recipients, you're the good ones. Like, if only we could just get the Republicans to work with us to pass immigration reform. And then I'd go into a Republican's office and sit down, and they say, oh, you poor DACA recipients, you good ones. If only we could get the Democrats to work with us on an immigration reform bill. They're always pointing fingers at each other. And I was just like, and it made me realize that there is no like clear victim, not victim, but hero or villain in this case. In fact, it was both parties just kind of trying to, trying to beat the other party and saying, well, we care about this issue more than you.
This is my life.
For whatever reason. Yes, and I'm like, I'm just trying to go to school and work and provide for my family. Like, can I just do that? You guys can argue about something else.
That's so frustrating.
We also need to make sure that we have enough visas allocated for the different industries that are struggling, that have workforce shortages. We also need to make sure that people that, like asylum seekers and people that are entering and fleeing dangerous situations, have a fair chance at coming here and being here legally, like my parents, and there are people that have been stuck here for so many years without a line to get into. They've been working and paying taxes. They've been paying taxes into government benefits that they can never apply for and they can never receive, and that's not okay. And so I think there are just so many aspects of the immigration system that need to be updated that I would just warn people, if the politician is talking about it in a way that is oversimplified, that is a red flag, because it's very complex and there's a lot of nuance. There are a lot of immigration statuses. Like having DACA, a DACA recipient is still considered an undocumented immigrant.
Yeah, I've been curious about that.
Yeah, because DACA is not like a permanent legal status in the country. And so since it's a temporary status, that simply prevents you from being deportable as long as you're in good standing with the government. It still doesn't mean you have a legal status in this country. So it's very confusing.
Yeah. Okay.
So
you would still be, if someone asked you to say, yes, I'm undocumented, obviously you'd say caveat here, but
yeah,
that's the number that you not anymore, but you would have fallen under.
Yes, before I got my green card through my U.S. citizen husband, I was undocumented under DACA. DACA recipients, and that's another way that it's oversimplified. When politicians make it sound like the two immigration statuses are legal or illegal. No, there are temporary statuses. There are in-between processing statuses.
And then when people say there's this many undocumented people in this country, it's false. I mean, it's not false, but it's false.
Yeah.
You're legally undocumented. I still think people, though, interchange illegal and undocumented.
Yes, they do. They really do. And yeah, it's really unfortunate because we look at how many undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants are in this country, and people that are here with legal status that have legal work permits and are paying taxes are thrown under that, which is why it's so dangerous to fall for those oversimplifications. And I definitely warn people against that. But yeah, I guess I would just basically summarize it like that. The process is extremely unfair, outdated, and confusing.
Oh wait, one follow-up question. So I worked with refugees a lot at one point, and I always couldn't figure out why are my friends from South America not they're having a lot harder time getting asylum status, and obviously they don't have refugee status, which in some countries I am not in the world that you're in. I don't understand it that well, but just from my own perspective, I'm why don't some of these countries have a refugee status?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, refugee and asylum, those are also terms that are used interchangeably and are very different.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you bring this up, because sometimes people think they're the same and they're not. So a refugee is someone that has the opportunity to apply for a status before coming to the US. So basically, they're in a safe enough environment and they have the resources to apply for a status in the United States before coming here. And usually it's
usually
under
a refugee camp. They've made it to one. Okay.
Exactly. And then an asylum seeker is someone who did not have similar circumstances. Perhaps they didn't have the resources or the knowledge to obtain that status before. And so they arrive at the border and basically surrender at the border and literally walk up to a border patrol agent and say, I am here to seek asylum, because they didn't have the resources to apply beforehand.
And they really are fleeing something.
Yes. And with asylum, you can only qualify for asylum based on certain categories. So you need to be fleeing persecution based on your race, religion, membership in a particular social group. Oh my gosh.
What is that, LGBT?
It could be that. It's a little bit more nuanced.
Political?
Yes. Political view is another one. I can't remember the other one. I think it's gender. Because obviously certain genders are discriminated against in other countries, right?
Yeah.
Or treated as less than the other gender. So anyways, to qualify for asylum, your story can't just be traumatizing and your life was in danger. It has to be because of one of 5 reasons. And it has to fall under one of those categories. But the Border Patrol agent can't determine that during their first interaction with you. So the process, our legal process for applying for asylum, is they let you into the country, they hold you in a facility, and then they release you into the country, and you have a year from the day you enter the United States to submit your asylum case. If you don't after that 1 year, then you can't after that point. And they tell you all of this. And then once you submit the petition, it takes years to hear back, because we have so many asylum petitions pending and not enough workers to process all the cases, that some people are here with a status that is literally called pending asylum.
I have friends in this situation right now, actually.
Yes, and they can be stuck in that status for years and years and years. The good thing is they do at least get a work permit so that they can work legally and provide for themselves and their families while they're waiting. But not every pending status grants you a work permit. And so, a lot of it with immigration status, a lot of it comes down to, well, what resources did you have before you came? Which is really hard, because in a lot of cases, the most vulnerable people that come to this country are asylum seekers, because they didn't even have the resources to ask for help before they got here, which is really serious. Yet, those are the people that we disrespect and talk the worst about, you know? And so, again, I just really, really want this to be clear. When an asylum seeker comes and surrenders at the border, they don't have a paper that says they're allowed to enter the country when they come in. But even then, they're technically still doing it legally.
Yes.
And so, again, just really, really trying to make it as clear as possible that legal versus illegal is so nuanced.
Yeah. So don't use those words.
No, please.
Don't use those words.
They are bad words. When you're speaking about human beings, they are bad words.
I agree. I've always this just doesn't feel right.
Yes.
Okay, I remember reading this paper. I went to school at BYU, Hawaii, and it was I grew up in Heber, so not too far from Orem, but again, predominantly white, My parents were really intentional about having people that were different than us in our home, though, so I didn't feel like uncomfortable around people that were different than me. But then I went to BYU Hawaii. Everyone's kind of a minority, which was, I loved it. There's people from all over the world, and it was such a wonderful experience. Anyway, one of my classes reviewed this book, or this article about being caught in between swinging doors. And, I think I had probably grasped the concept a little bit before, and since I understand a lot more because of my proximity to friends and people that get stuck in between the swinging door. But the idea being that for you came to this country and you were two. So this is your country. But yet you also have parents whose country is Mexico. And Spanish is probably your first language. But yet you went to school in English. So I would love to know, your thoughts on that and what that was like for you being caught in between swinging doors.
Oh, that's such a good question. It was both beautiful and really challenging. There's a phrase that's used a lot in the dreamer world, which dreamer is another nickname for DACA recipients, but immigrants that came to the U.S. as children could also be considered dreamers, even if they don't have DACA status.
Okay.
So when someone says dreamer, it could mean someone with DACA status or just someone that was brought to the U.S. as a child. Sorry, not brought to the U.S., but came to the U.S. as a child. I try to avoid saying brought because, again, it places blame on our parents, and we do not like that. There's a phrase that is floated around a lot in the dreamer world, and it's, right, not from here and not from there. Almost this belief that we're not from whatever country we were born in, but we're also not from the United States. So where are we from, and where do we belong? And it's a really painful phrase to think about.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of, have you watched the Selena Quintanilla movie?
I've heard about it.
Jennifer Lopez was she played Selena. So Selena was a Mexican-American artist who grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. This movie kind of dives into her life, and it talks a little bit about how she struggled to balance her Mexican and American identity. And there's one scene where I guess her Spanish was kind of bad, and her dad was kind of giving her a pep talk and saying you need to prove to the Mexicans that you're Mexican enough, and you need to prove to the Americans that you're American enough. And that was another thing that just really, really hit me to my core, where it felt like I was always trying to prove that I belonged around my American friends or around my Mexican family or my Mexican friends. And I was always trying to prove that I was one of them, but I somehow always felt short. Or fell short, at least in my mind. Maybe in some of their minds, but I think it was mainly self-imposed. But I think that's something that happens when you're just told so often that you don't belong, or that you don't speak the language well enough, or that you don't understand the culture or fully live it the way it's supposed to be lived. And that was something that I really, really struggled with and really affected my self-esteem as a teenager, is just I'm not from here and I'm not from there. Then where do I belong and where am I from? And I learned over time and maturing and going to therapy and realizing where my worth really stems from, I learned to kind of let go of that. And I learned that I was placing too much value in what other people thought of me, that I hadn't taken the time to say, well, what do I think of myself? And I had to be really honest with myself and say, I love my Mexican culture, but there's a lot of machismo in my family, which is, I don't know, how would you say machismo in English, or what?
Masculinity, but...
Yeah, toxic masculinity. Yeah. There's a lot of toxic masculinity in Mexico, where the man is always right. There's a lot of domestic abuse. There's a lot of infidelity that is okay for a Mexican man to do, but not for a woman to do, right? And just Mexican women are expected to endure a lot of abuse. And so that was a part of my Mexican culture that had really hurt me as a child. And I realized one day I can let that go and still enjoy other parts of my Mexican heritage.
Wow.
And then I realized I could do that with my American culture too. Wait a second, some of these people are really racist. And it's not all in my head. I literally had someone tell me once, this older white lady, we were talking about my immigration status in DACA, and she stops me, she interrupts me as I'm talking about my immigration status, and she goes, wait, you came here legally, right? And I was just like, huh?
What
Like,
else
I
is there?
straight up lied because I was like, why would you say it like that?
Yeah.
And later on, I learned it's because she probably doesn't understand it, the nuance with
Yeah.
coming legally versus not coming legally.
Mhm.
But, I started learning that I could give myself permission to pick and choose what I wanted to take from both cultures and how I wanted them to influence me and who I chose to be.
Mhm.
And so I almost started, taking control of the narrative and saying, I can be both,
Yeah.
right? And now there's a different twist to that phrase, the ni de aquí ni de allá, and it's de aquí y de allá. So from here and from there, right?
Beautiful.
And that's
Is that your
something.
thing, or people say that?
No, I wish it was my thing, but no. It's just another phrase that's been, thrown around. And
Yeah.
some people resonate with that more than the not from here or there. I think, every immigrant has the right to choose which one they resonate with more and why.
Yeah.
And it can be beautiful either way. But for me and my process of healing and really determining where my worth lies, it was healing for me to kind of lean in more into the from here and from there,
Yeah.
because it made me feel like I was in control and I could choose what aspects of that I identify with and what aspects of that I don't identify with. So that was a very empowering part of my life that has helped me a lot just as an adult now.
Wow. That's amazing.
Recently I spoke in church about prayer and miracles. And immediately when this topic was assigned to me, I thought of this one experience I had at the temple. And this experience happens to be a little bit political and about immigration. But I shared it in church, and I'll share how that went after I share the experience. But the experience was that Trump was president at the time, and there were a lot of really, really harmful things being said about immigrants by him and his administration. Things like calling DACA recipients criminals, for example.
Yeah.
And I was having a really hard time with it, and I felt very, very angry. And I just thought about how one of the very first earthly titles that Jesus Christ had when he came to earth was an immigrant, right? Because his mother, really struggled to find a place where she could safely and comfortably have him. And they had fled, their home. And I just kind of felt confused, and I was like, Heavenly Father, I feel like I've learned so much about my value and the value of others through this immigration status that you've given me. And a status that Jesus Christ can also relate to. Why are you allowing people to speak so poorly about us? Why are you allowing people to use us as scapegoats? Like, don't you care? And it felt frustrating as well, because this is something that is being done by the political party that claims to be very Christian, right? And very religious. And I just felt very angry in general. And I was just like, Heavenly Father, this is so frustrating. I'm so mad. But that day, my husband and I were assigned to take the youth to the temple. And I was like, I can't go. Like, I have too much anger and hatred in my heart right now. Like, I just can't go. But I was like, okay, I have to. And I just went to the temple. I parked in the parking lot. My husband had picked up the kids with another leader. And I just sat in the car and I just started crying, and I just said a prayer, and I just said, Heavenly Father, can you just tell me what you think of them? Of immigrants, what you think of us? I didn't get an answer in that moment. Honestly, I was just still very filled with rage. I was like, okay, whatever, we can talk about this later. I go into the temple, I'm already running late. We go in, I calm down, and I feel more at peace. We're on our way out of the temple, and as we're leaving, we're approaching the entrance of the temple, and there is a Hispanic family standing in the lobby with dirty clothes. Like, they looked like they hadn't showered in like months. And they were struggling to communicate with the temple workers. And, I know that's my cue to jump in and be a translator. So I approach them, and I start translating and say, hi, what's going on? And the temple worker's like, we don't understand them. The temple worker that speaks Spanish is on their way, but they're a little busy right now. I say, it's okay, I can help. And I translate, and this family says, we just arrived here from the border.
Oh my.
We don't know what church this is. we'd never heard of it before, but we said a prayer when we got to Utah, and we asked God to help us find him in this country, and he led us to this building. Wow. Can you help us? Because God guided us here. And immediately I just got chills. And, you know, it felt like an answer to my question. That God still inspires his children to migrate today. And it didn't just start and stop with the pioneers. It started with Jesus Christ. Actually, no, not even Jesus Christ. It started long before them. There's so many stories of migration in the Bible and in the Book of Mormon. In fact, Sister Reina Burto, who was, I believe, the second counselor of the Relief Society president, once called the Book of Mormon a story of migration. Because there's so much migration that happens in the Book of Mormon. And I just watched the temple workers come together to help this family and to serve them. And it was so beautiful, and I got to learn a little bit about their experience. And it showed me exactly what God thought of them, you know, that he is inspiring his children not just to come here, but to come to us. And what posture are we going to have? How are we going to receive them when God is literally inspiring them and guiding them to us? And at that point, I learned not only what God thinks of immigrants, right? And I don't want to say all immigrants, because just as I believe that there are immigrants that come here to seek refuge and to, you know, do good things, I know that there are also immigrants that come here to commit crimes and to, you know, not obey the laws. So I don't want an immigrant to be a blanket statement, but as far as, you know, immigrants that come here with good intention, I know that God loves them, and I know that God even brings them to us, and how we respond to that is more important than the actions of the immigrants themselves. And that is when we have an opportunity to show if we are disciples of Christ or not, taking all politics aside.
So yeah, it's a big stewardship. How
Yes.
are we handling the people that are entrusted to our communities?
Yeah, exactly. He said that so beautifully. And so I should listen to church.
Oh no, I don't want to hear it. I was really enjoying the experience.
No, actually, I've gotten positive response. Okay, I don't want to say overall. I have gotten positive response. People just saying, like, I've never thought about it that way. And I even had one brother come up to me and say, I don't think we see eye to eye on immigration, but I can tell you know things that I don't know. Can you teach me more?
Wow.
Which I thought was really powerful. And even though he's a little intimidating, because after that, it followed with him sharing his political opinion and saying, I want mass deportations. You know, I still think it created a space where we could hear each other out and humanize each other's experiences. So I actually do encourage people to have those kinds of conversations at church. Let's not shy away from them, because who are we if we are telling, especially the youth, I think about our youth a lot. Who are we if we're telling our youth, oh, these experiences and issues you're facing in the real world, you can't bring that here. God can't help you with that. We can't help you.
We don't want all of you. We just want this piece of you.
Yes. I think we need to obviously not have political conversations at church, but to bring up times where we are putting politics over humanity.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about that at church. And I think a big issue within our church right now is that we don't do that. And we just throw it under the category of political, right?
Or we just assume everyone thinks the way we do. I
Yes.
feel like I see in my congregation, like after the elections, in the prayer during sacrament meeting, you know, it was a prayer of gratitude for how the election had gone. Just assuming that everyone maybe felt that way or voted that way.
Yeah, for sure.
So, two-part question. One, where have you found belonging? You've shared some really sweet stories already, but if you have anything else to share to that, where have you found belonging? And then what would you advise to do, or what do you do now to create belonging in the spaces that you're in?
Oh, I love that question. Well, first of all, when I think of a space where I felt belonging, I don't think of a physical location. I think of people. Faces come to mind.
Yes. Who are they?
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna start crying. My parents. My undocumented friends. my husband, my little brothers, just, I think overall, across the board, a lot of similarities between all of them, but one thing is that those are all people that are, first of all, imperfect, right? But people that have struggled with the concept of belonging themselves and have really, really discovered what it means to belong themselves, and in turn making me feel like I belong. I just think that you can't, I think this idea of like belonging and compassion is actually really contagious, because the more you learn about your worth and the more you find a sense of belonging, the easier it is to give that to others and to offer that to others. In fact, I think it needs to start with yourself as well.
Yeah.
You need to believe that you belong. You need to believe that you have worth in order to really be able to offer that fully to others. Because I really do think that at the end of the day, it's a belief that we all come to obtain if we want it. And I also think about my mentor and boss, Syriac. Her name is Syriac Alvarez Valle, and she was the first advocate mentor I had joining this field. She basically taught me how to talk about my immigration status. She basically taught me the skills to do it in a way that is vulnerable, but also like protecting myself. And I think she's someone that has made me feel like I belong, because she's someone that has made me feel like my immigration status is not something that defines me, but it's just something that's a part of me, and it can be something beautiful. And then the second question, can you remind me what the second question is?
What do you do to create belonging in your spaces? You do a lot of advocacy work. You work with a lot of people that have been in your shoes.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
I think education is so important. It's something I've really focused on, is how to help the immigrant community feel belonging, because that's a space where we're really, an area that we're really lacking in the United States. And something I do is education. I really do think that education is liberation for the undocumented community, educating them on their rights, any pathways to legality that they do have, and also just validating their experiences, even if it's different than mine.
Yeah.
Far too often, unfortunately, within the immigrant community, we're pinned against each other so much that as soon as someone gets a legal status, they shut the door behind them. And they then start criticizing the immigrants that are in the position they once were in, or maybe never had to be in that position because they had the resources to do it a different way.
I've seen this.
And that's really painful.
Yeah.
And that's not a way that we build belonging within the community. So something I try to do within the immigrant community is create belonging by validating everyone's experiences.
And what does that look like?
Sometimes it looks like people speaking very positively about the US immigration system because they had the opportunity to do it the legal way right off the bat, and saying, you know what, I'm so happy for you. I'm so glad that you had that positive experience, even though I didn't. I'm so glad that your form of patriotism is loving this country and being proud of where it is right now. But my form of patriotism is challenging the country and its current state so that it can be better.
Yeah.
And so that more people can have the good experience that you had. And so sometimes it's just validating, and kind of saying like, I'm so happy for you, even though that wasn't my perspective. Is it okay if I share my perspective with you so you can understand me a little bit more too? Or talking to someone that hates the system, doesn't even think it's worth getting involved civically and educating people on it, because what's the point?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're always going to play volleyball with immigration. And saying, I actually totally get where you're coming from. And especially recently, I can really relate to that. And I totally understand why you want to step away and not be civically engaged and not share your immigration story. I totally understand why you think it's dangerous. Here's why I share my story. And so I think just a lot of validation of stories and saying, just because you experienced it. Yes, I believe you. And just because you experienced it one way doesn't mean everyone is experiencing it that way.
Yeah.
Which can be really hard, but is so important to do.
That's beautiful. You're amazing.
You're amazing too.
We need 2 more hours. I really appreciate you. I appreciate the time you've taken, one, to like do the advocacy work that you're doing, but also just to like reflect on your own story. And I can just tell the goodness that you bring to the world. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah.
This has been so fun.